Ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely our pleasure to invite you to listen to episode 1 of Gone Fishing with my great mate, Ryan Ellis from the UK. Good afternoon, Ryan, from me, but good morning to you.
Good morning from me here in miserable, rainy, drizzly Harrogate, United Kingdom, but it doesn't take the smile off my face. I am delighted to be here, and I can't wait to go fishing, Andy.
I know, it is so brilliant, Ryan. You and I know we've talked about our trilogy on the PE umbrella, but this is something we talked about back in June and July doing, and it's taken us a long time because, let's face it, the fish were out, and it took us a long time to catch one, but we've hauled one in now, and we thought we would put together a bit of a show that's going to be a podcast as well, but also a live video for about a half an hour, and we're just going to talk business and just talk about what motivates us and what we've seen in and around the world, which is really, really cool. Can you give, for those people that haven't met you before, can you give people a 1-minute synopsis of who you are?
1-minute synopsis of who I am. So, Ryan Ellis, a lot of people may or may not know me currently as the host, creator of the PE Umbrella podcast. First and foremost, I am a dad to 2 amazing children, a husband to a wonderful wife. I am a qualified primary school teacher who teaches primary PE, and I am an avid sports fan, particularly Leeds United.
Ooh,
there we go, that's me.
Yeah, fantastic. And I am Andy here, and this is my first podcast with the fabulous Ryan Ellis. And we met many years ago, obviously through the great land of Twitter. I'm a physical education teacher in Geelong, Victoria, Australia. Currently, it is spring and I'm smiling. I've also got 2 fabulous kids, but mine are 19 and 17. So I'm at the back end of childhood, which is fabulous. My wife is also refers to me as her 3rd child, which is no surprise to anybody. I am a mad sports fan myself, followed the Ironman triathlon, and I have to be a Newcastle fan in the soccer only because that's what the default says on EA games.
Oh, goodness. Is it? Yeah, Newcastle. Wow. Well. Something I didn't mention, though, is a big hats off and congrats to Team Europe in the Ryder Cup. Last weekend it will be now. I don't know when this will be out, but Ryder Cup golf, big fan. Europe smashed it against the USA last week. So for any US people watching, I am sorry, but go Team Europe.
Yeah, and who's the postman? I saw this guy.
The postman, Ian Poulter, because he always delivers. He always delivers at the Ryder Cup. He is the postman.
Yes, absolutely. I really love that. That is so cool. And so really, I guess episode 1 today is all about just setting the scene and talking to people about why we've gone fishing. And you can see that we're wearing our hats. So this is a bit of a concept that we came up with. And we talk about, as educators, fishing all the time for great ideas. And Twitter is a great honeypot for us to get so many ideas out of. And you can always throw the rod in and pull out as much as you can. But sometimes when we're fishing our own schools, we can actually get motivated to produce the goods and bring home the bait, or not bring home the bait, bring home the fish because we've thrown out the bait. And so I thought episode 1, let's talk about what we do in our schools or what we've seen in other places that gets us to motivate those students that are a little bit reluctant to be engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to kick off?
Yeah, I reckon.
I'll kick off. Well, first and foremost, when it comes to motivation, I've always prided myself on being able to motivate children just with being present in the room. And I've spoken to you about this before, a number of guests on the podcast, Dale Sidebottom, your brother from another mother. Yeah. And for me, the first part of motivation is as an individual walking in front of that group of children, my class or somebody else's class, and my very presence, my smile, my enthusiasm, my bouncing around the walls, the tone of my voice, and I simply throw that hook out of how I am. And I expect and almost demand, and they can see it from me, lots of bites of buy-in as to what I am delivering. And the way that I am as a teacher, just like I am on the podcast, is I'm super pumped up about what it is I am delivering. And if I can't be that person who is hyped about what I'm doing and the subject I love, I can't expect that in return. So it's a two-way street. I'm giving them everything that I've got, and in return, I expect everything they've got. And I have to say, very rarely does that go awry for me. It is often the case that I've got a lot of children pretty much all of them buy in. Don't get me wrong, there are tales, and I'm sure we'll get into this a bit later, where there are those tougher shells to crack. But for me, it has to come from the individual. And if you're a teacher who's just stood at the side, droning on, you're looking disinterested, even if you're only at 70% interest, that isn't enough. You've got to be full throttle all the time. And I know it's hard, and you've described it before, Andy, as putting on a show. It is simply putting on a show. And I've said this in many posts recently. I feel like I'm almost two people. I am me at home with my kids and my wife, and you might say reining it in a little bit. And then you put me on the podcast, and then you put me in front of a class, and it is like flicking a light switch. It is like going there. It's doing this. It's like going boom, light on, bang, straight into it. And all of a sudden, I'm a different person. So yeah, number one for me, full of beans, enthusiasm. That is what's going to get my kids initially motivated.
Yeah. And I have to agree with you, and I'll pause things just for a second, because I just worked out this feature on Zoom that we can go side by side. So for the first 5-10 minutes, people are going to be looking at you. But
no worries.
We've just worked it out. But I have to agree with you. I have to absolutely agree with you. And I guess this has driven me bonkers for a little while, why, when I'm in front of a crowd or in front of a presentation or on the radio, or most importantly, in front of kids, I am this effervescence of hyperactivity. And, as a child growing up with ADHD, and as an adult still trying to harness that in, it's very, very difficult. But I find that motivating kids is very, very simple, because I'm at their mentality. When I go into that class, whether it's a 6-year-old or whether it's a 12-year-old, my personality is targeted around that. And I sat with the great Mark Collard. Have you had him on the PE umbrella yet?
I haven't, no, but I believe I understand. Is he Plamio, Mr. Plamio?
Mr. Plamio. So he's one that you have to get, because the ideal of play exists. And if we can get kids to trust us through play, then we can actually take them on any journey we want and go fishing with as many ideas, as crazy as they are, because trust is that big element. So I think coming into and trialing different things in schools come from that level of trust to start with. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
No, of course, yeah. So, it makes it much easier if you've got your own class. So I always relate to the English teachers in primary schools who have their own class. They see them day in, day out all the time, which makes it much easier to gain that element of trust. It's much trickier if you're only seeing a class once or twice a week, but if you give it time, it will, without a doubt, is possible. It will happen if you're consistent and you're actually open to building relationships and trust, and you're making an effort. If you're not putting in the effort, it won't happen.
No,
I want to go back to what you did say before about sort of taking on that play, adventure and journey. Funnily enough, I had this conversation with my wife earlier today, this morning, when we got up. She was probably bored when I was saying it, but I said to her, I can't think of a single lesson teaching Key Stage 1 children, and I often deliver a theme-based lesson. I can't think of a single one that I've delivered where there's been a child who's not been interested. And I've delivered so many of classes of 30, I can't pinpoint one. And usually it's the negative aspects of teaching that I remember more than the better ones, because I want to strive to get better. I can't think of one. And I'm not sure what the reason is. And I think there's just an enormous buy-in to the whole concept and notion of adventure and play through the learning that we're doing. The children seemingly love it. And to add on to that, I'm on that journey with them too. So I'm not simply standing there saying, okay, we are going to be animals in the zoo today. Who can be that? I'm actually doing it with them. Oh, this is how I'm going to be a horse. What would a horse look like if it's moving around the field? What would a snake look like moving through? So I'm actually doing it with them and learning with them. And they're just feeding off of that energy. And it just gets them all involved with me.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's one thing that I'm doing a bit of study at the moment with dance play with Mel Levenberg. And one of the parts of the elements that we're up to at the moment is, that whole nature and nurture of our interaction, and when it's time to actually get involved inside the class, and when it's time to actually skirt around the outside as well, for that observational type of thing. But you're exactly right that we own in the narrative, and the children and us are characters in that narrative, and that narrative exists and develops right across a longevity. You must walk down the street being a superstar teacher and find that there's students that have gone through your system that they spot you in the street and they go, "Oh, Mr. Ellis, do you remember when?" And they come back and they tell you those stories. And I have to tell you some really funny stories, because right now I've got this real cultural change where I'm actually teaching children of parents that I taught. And it's bizarre, because I'm now able to tell stories to the kids that their parents did in PE, but then they go home and tell mum and dad, and then mum and dad come back in and have the chuckles because they haven't realised that I've remembered that. And then they're coming back in and going, "How do you remember this type of stuff? Because, such and such is coming home telling us these stories."
And that's amazing how positive of an impact that you've had on not just one generation, two generations of these individuals and their love of PE, hopefully. I mean, I wouldn't say it happens all the time, because the town I'm in, Harrogate, I occasionally see students past and students present, and they'll always be very polite and pleasant and say hi. Sometimes you get the ones who are sort of, they've spotted you, but they're telling their mum or dad, and you can see they're like, "Oh, there's Mr. Ellis over there, he teaches PE." And they'll sort of say it quite sneakily. But I did have a nice sort of interaction a few weeks back, just before my op. I was actually driving home from picking my son up from school, and there were two boys on bikes who were actually of high school age, and they were both children I taught about 4 or 5 years ago. And I was driving past very slowly in traffic, and a couple of them saw me, and they saw, it was like a knowing look. They didn't shout or wave, but they knew, they recognised me. So as I turned the corner and was stuck in traffic, they both came cycling up and sort of tapped on my window. So I wound it down, and there was two lads who I remember really well from primary school. Amazing sports people, athletes, just lovely, lovely kids, most importantly. And they've matured so much. I mean, this is 4 or 5 years down the line. So I had them in year 6 and now in year 10 and 11, respectively, upper high school. And, they leant in, shaking my hand. "Oh, how are you doing, mister? It's really good to see you, Mr. Ellis. How are you?" And, just a really pleasant interaction, which was, for me, there was no mention per se of PE or of when I was teaching them, but I was probing them about their current careers. One of them's a great footballer. And they were just really lovely, sociable people. And I thought, you know what, they've turned out brilliant. And it was nice of them to even approach the car with the handshake and just be so personable.
Isn't it nice? Like, when you talk about motivating kids, and this is my 23rd year of teaching, and I don't really remember too many negative incidents. At the time, I might have thought that they were negative, but when I now look back on them as an adult, I can see the sense in why they happened and can unpack them in a totally different way. But then can see that how that child has used that to be able to motivate their life in a positive way. And there's also negative ways as well with some of the kids that we've seen. But isn't it nice to know that, as a specialised teacher in physical education, where we get to see kids intensely for one day a week, that longevity of those memories really stay with the kids. And I guess when we talk about motivation, and we are sitting in schools where we often teach by ourselves in our cohort with our subject, it's how we develop the community. And that culture of community around you, and how we then conduct our presence inside that community. I know, Leopold, it might be very similar. How many people in your community, in your town?
Oh, in Harrogate town, I couldn't pluck a figure out of thin air, but it's in the many tens of thousands.
Yep.
It's pretty large town, but I couldn't give you an exact figure, Andy. I'm not entirely sure.
No, so then across that community, you're able to probably influence a suburb. I'm quite lucky at Leopold. Leopold is a suburb which is around about 5 to 10 kilometres outside of the general census of Geelong. And the population is 4,000 to 6,000 people there at the moment. And what I've been able to do over the last 15 to 17 years is really develop a cultural approach. So we've got grandparents who believe in the program, who their children and now their grandchildren are going through the school. And, I put a shout out on the Leopold community page a few days ago just to say, hey, this is who I am, for those that don't know me. And then, people have coming on, having a chat from 15 years ago going, "Oh, you're still at the school, I'll have to come down and say hello." And that's because the community is such a large part of that motivation of kids, because the stories go down, but it's the trust, the big T.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the big difference from over here. And I wish it was a similar scenario, is that being a slightly larger community here, and I know lots of the cities around England, very condensed, but larger towns, is not everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. And that is one of the big drivers behind why I do what I do, and in particular with the podcast and waving that flag, because you have some primary schools who are huge advocates for active learning, and phys ed is high on their priority list. We have others who quite frankly, they'll just shove it in once a week for that hour because that's the minimum they have to do. Some schools are using this scheme of planning. Some schools are attending competitions, some are not. And that's even within this small town. So it's hard to forge that sense of community when all of the schools themselves are not even doing the same thing or valuing it the same way.
Yeah.
And it's that trying to bring everybody together to have that sense of community and purpose and drive for what physical education can bring to the schools and the town. So yeah, it's going to be a long journey. It's going to be a hard fought battle, but one which I'm really excited to be on, and hopefully can make a bigger impact.
Absolutely. And that's why the Tour de France is so great as a cycling event, because for every uphill battle that the cyclists have, they can reach the top, zip up their jersey or stuff the paper down their jersey, zip it up and free roll it down to the bottom. And that's the best ride. I think, you work really hard to be able to reap the rewards. And as educators, our journey is like this every single day. But it's those downhill rides which we coast through, which really motivates and gets us going again, and getting back there. And, we start back next week. So this is our term 4 for the year. We're almost done for this school year. And I find that every term I go back, there is something new that I want to do. And let me tell you a little secret. So this is what I'm going to do a little bit of podcasting out about as well. And I reckon we'll touch base in 4 weeks, and we can talk about this one. Is the gamification's really, really got me going over the last few years, but I'm looking at it going, okay, well, that's good, but the kids don't see it as much as I want them to see it. So I've taken what I've seen as all these Lego ideas around. And there were, in the adapted PE programs, obviously, there's sensory boards with Legos that children can engage in. So I'm scratching my head going, okay, this is now tangible, that if I can get the kids in prep to working on their fundamental motor skills and actually achieve a certain element that represents a color of Lego. So it might be, for instance, say throwing a ball. So they might throw a ball and it might hit the floor before it hits the wall. So that the children achieve something. They can actually be successful and get a yellow brick of Lego and walk over to the sensory board where we have all the green Lego sheets and put it up. Or they might throw really hard and it hits the middle of the target, which is, the size of a ping pong ball, so they get a black one. So regardless of what they do, they achieve something. For us as teachers, it means something in certain levels of autonomy. But for the students, they're then achieving something and able to contribute to a class. What's going to be on those Lego maps is I'm going to have a big picture and it'll be a shape. It might be a hexagonal, might be a star, it might be a cross, it might be a picture of a building. But the kids together have to try and make that shape. So regardless of what colours come on, they're then working together as a grade to make that shape. So that's what there's going to be motivating me this term.
That sounds fantastic. And I can't wait, for one, just hearing you talk about it, to see how that transpires. And I want you to take some photos of it as it's moving along. So when the first piece is on, and actually when it's just a few more on, and as it builds up, that sort of journey of what it will look like with the different colours. And I really like the thought of it being a picture. I like the idea that it's a community, it's a team effort, that whole sense of we are in this together. And is that going to be the whole school contributing to it, or is it going to be individual for each class?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with individual for each class. So what we'll do is we'll have a level that we can achieve. So it's going to be trying to represent the shape to start with. And maybe the kids are going to have to develop that collaborative nature, that if it is a star and they realise that they start going too small, that they finish it really quick. So what happens when we finish it quick? So maybe we then go in to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to make it organic, so then we can build it with the children along the way through discussions and get them to throw that input in. And I'm trying to probably engage the older kids then to design the shapes for the younger kids. So then it's that real blended learning approach that we've got kids at home that might design it on the computer as a picture, or they might design it in Lego themselves, and we then have to replicate it. So it becomes a really whole school approach where we can flip all that.
So is your idea then that this is it going to be like a Lego board on the wall that the blocks stick to, like a big green Lego mat, if you like?
Yep.
One of those. I understand.
So I've got a whiteboard that I'm going to get. I think I worked it out. It's 20 Lego squares, those big ones, and I'm going to glue them onto the whiteboard. So they're all together. So it's a big map that we can get going, because then, if the kids get really good, like sometimes I've got 50 kids in a class. Now, if I have 8 or 9 stations that they're all achieving like this, I can go super huge. I've just got to keep up with the Legos.
Yeah, see, you need a lot of Lego pieces. And I think one thing there, which you can unpick a bit further, is the fact that within whatever challenges you are setting them, giving them that sense of autonomy that they can choose, is they can choose which colour Lego brick they go for. So like you said, it could be a yellow brick if they can throw it, bounce it off the floor and hits the wall and catches it, or a black brick or a red brick for whatever it would be. And it's that autonomy which I've, in the past 2 to 3 years in gamification ideas, harnessed more success with motivating children with as well, because I was very much a dictator on a power trip when I started teaching. It was very much, I'm at the front, this is what we're doing. I had my coach's hat on. It's just how I learned. It's what I did. I thought it was the way that it was done from what I'd seen in high schools. But then going into primary, I slowly found that there were certain groups of children that met that with resistance. And I'm thinking, I'm enthusiastic, I always have been, but I'm giving out these orders and some of them are not having any of it. And it's only when I took a step back and started offering them a bit more slack in the rope, as if to say, right, well, you can choose your challenge. You can choose how you do it. And that's where I started making a lot more of these self-guided progressions, and Mike Ginicola, a big inspiration behind that, where they can level up and they can try this and then try that. And giving them that choice, just like you're doing with the Lego, has been a huge motivator for my children. That autonomy, that thought that they're actually in charge of their learning. Even though I've given them the choices, it's like with my son. He thinks he's the boss of the family, and if he thinks he's making the choices, everyone's happy. But I'm giving him choices that I'm happy with. So you can do that. Or you could do that one if you want to. I'm happy with either of them, but he thinks ultimately he's choosing. And it's like that with the children and their learning journey. I'm giving them choices and progressions to level up that I'm happy with, but ultimately they feel like they've got ownership in that. And I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, that's right. And it comes down, there's two criteria out of that. They're going to go either on a goals sort of improvement mindset, or they're going to go on a strengths mindset. So they're going to try to achieve what they know they can achieve, or they're going to reach out and try to achieve something that they know they can't achieve. So the conditions will be, for me, that they have to achieve that strike or that hit or that distance 3 times in their attempts to be able to earn that Lego piece. So if they're going to go for the double black diamond run, then they've got to hit that 3 times. But then they see the clock winding down. They go, I can still get a yellow piece. 1, 2, 3. Good, I'm off.
Just had a thought then, Andy, as well. Then it's more work for you, of course. But then could you, in a sense, with your Lego picture build-up, could you almost have 2? And one of them is that sense of, this is something I know I can do, and one of them is, I'm going to stretch and push myself. So could we have a picture which is sort of our challenge board, which you can get pieces for only if you've really stretched yourself, and build up that picture, and then a separate one as well? Possibly a thought. So
now we're differentiating right through.
Splitting the 2.
Hey, and that's why we have to go fishing, isn't it?
Exactly. Finding the ideas.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, Ryan, I think we're out of time. It is 8 a.m. your way.
It is 8 a.m. my way. It's breakfast time.
Yeah, 5 p.m. my way. So it's almost dinner time, or tea time, as we call it down under. Hey, episode 1, Gone Fishing in the books. I'm really, really thrilled that you've got in the canoe and paddling upstream with me and looking for the big barramundi.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Andy. I've simply loved it. I hope everybody else who's tuned in or listened to it has as well. I can't wait to get my fishing rod back out next time and don the hat and go fishing for some more fizz-head gold.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Gone Fishing. And this is Ryan, Ellis, and Andy here signing out.